Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to our 26th Roses seminar, Reading Online Sport Economics Seminars. This week we have our second talk on COVID-19 and its effect on outcomes of sporting events. We're really pleased to have Justus Haucap from the Düsseldorf Institute for Competition Economics, who's presenting work with Kai Fischer, who's also on the call. The work is titled, Does Crowd Support Drive the Home Advantage in Professional Soccer? Evidence from the German Ghost Games during the COVID-19 pandemic. Justus will have about an hour to present in total, and then we'll have plenty of time, up to 30 minutes for Q&A afterwards. Whilst Justus is speaking, please do keep your microphones muted, and if possible, turn your cameras off as well. And if you want to ask questions, chat along, comment, you feel free to use the conversation window. I will keep an eye on that as we go along, and I will put questions there to Justus at the end. And also you'll have an opportunity to raise your hand and ask questions yourself. You feel free also to email me questions if you're unable to access the conversation window. But without any further ado, what I'll do is I'll hand this over to Justus, who'll take away his presentation.
Okay, thanks very much, James. I'm pleased to present work that Kai Fischer and myself have prepared over during the crisis, so to say. Let me put it to full screen. So I hope you can hear me well and also see the pictures. So Kai is also on the call, so he probably has to take all the difficult questions in the end. But I try to guide you through what we did over the last few months, among other things. Of course, I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic has, apart from all the negative consequences, also provided a unique setup for research in all areas of economic activity, actually be it health economics, macroeconomics, public policy, or I also think being an industrial economist by heart or by training or by most of my work, there are probably also interesting consequences for market structures in many industries, but these are not so easy to detect in the short term, actually, while the effects on how crowd support may change soccer results or football results is more easy to detect in the short term. And given that Kai and myself are ardent football supporters for teams playing in second and third division, actually, we sort of sat together and that this is an interesting natural experiment in the economic sense to see what how, first of all, crowd support may affect results in football, but also maybe shed some more light on how the channels actually, what exactly affects the home advantage, because there are, as well, most of you will know, and especially those I think who have been there last week will have discussed. There are different theories and channels that have been identified how the home advantage, or what's maybe the cause and root of the home advantage. And we thought this maybe a unique setting to identify this, and we were in the, let's say, a good position that Germany was the first country in Europe that opened up again and sort of started with the ghost games, and that was probably how we got the idea to look at it relatively early. So there have been, as some of you will know now, quite a number of papers on sort of how the home advantage has changed during the pandemic. The countries have treated actually home games somewhat differently. France has cancelled all the games. Italy, Spain, the UK have set up ghost games. But even though there has been some degree of heterogeneity, as I understand, for what has been done in the stadium during the ghost games, Germany, in that sense, is unique in. First of all, it was the first country to open up for ghost games. So I think the German teams were not in the position to learn anything from experience in other countries, for example, because they couldn't look at what happened somewhere else, as opposed to Italy or the UK, where the ghost game started later. So they, in theory at least, could have gained something from the German experience. And what was also different that in Germany, there was nothing like artificial fan chant, for example, neither on TV actually, which probably doesn't affect the games at all, but also not in the stadium. So it was, you could hear every word quite well, actually, because there was no noise at all. And so our idea was to look at what will happen, sort of what happened, and what are the roots or the causes for what we observed. Well, maybe when we were looking at the game sort of without any statistical evidence, you sort of get the idea quite early, I think, that the home advantage vanished in the first division in Germany. That was when we sat together and sort of shared our impressions, that was the impression that we had, even though there was no hard evidence on that. But that is something that you will see later. That is also confirmed in the data that in the first division, the home advantage actually vanished, especially early during the Ghost games. The literature sort of on the home advantage has identified several reasons why there may be a home advantage. And the one is that we focus on maybe crowd support. They say, okay, if you're supported by a crowd, that may help you directly, or it may also help you indirectly. This is the fifth or the fourth bullet point here, where you say there may be the indirect effect that the referee is affected by the crowd, and they may be affected more by the home crowd than by the away crowd. So he may actually be biased towards the home team. And that is something that we also focus on a little bit later. And this is something, both things that may have changed during the Ghost games. Something that should not have changed is the travel burden, for example, because there's also some literature that says if you have to travel to an away game, you just doesn't feel as good as if you can sleep at home before in the night of the game or in your hometown. That is something, of course, that hasn't changed. So we thought the Ghost games gave some opportunity to disentangle these effects. Is it more the travel burden, or is it the crowd support in a direct or indirect fashion? And then there are other I think very, very interesting theories about how psychology may affect the home advantage, theories of behavior in wars and so on. But this is something that is typically not very easy actually to measure, but this may play a role, and this is something that is very difficult, I think, to measure also how this may have changed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Overall, though, there is huge support for the home advantage. There have been, I don't know how many papers on the topic, but many, many papers. And before we had the corona pandemic, it was, well, I would say, very, very difficult, at least close to impossible, to isolate the drivers. Say, is it more the home support or is it more the travel burden? Because you typically had both at all times, and you could not disentangle this. So this is in that sense, unique opportunity to disentangle some of the effects. There have been studies by our host, James, and also others in the audience, I think, on the home advantage even before COVID-19 and ghost effects. James, you assembled all this, I don't know, 300 something games where the ghost game was awarded as a penalty to the home game, but only usually one or maybe two ghost games in a row, and not a series of 6 ghost games or something that we have seen right now. So there has been a limited literature, or we only found really these 2 papers, one by James and co-authors, and the other one very old paper with a very limited number of observations in Italy. actually. And now there have been few people such as ourselves who have apparently sort of recognized this is a good idea to study how this has changed or how we can disentangle the ghost game effects. And my reading or our reading of the paper is that there is a huge consensus that the home advantage has decreased, at least during the ghost games. And the evidence on the reasons for why it has decreased are still not entirely clear, I would say, and settled. And we try to contribute a little bit to clarify why this, or to identify why this may have actually happened. And we want to examine what is the role of the crowd. Yeah, does fan attendance improve team performance? And then also one aspect of the paper is what is a good measure of attendance. Actually, that's one aspect where we'll report on later. We also find, we only concentrate on Germany, but we look at the first 3 divisions. So this is by and large what is professional soccer or professional football in Germany. And as you will see, we find actually differences or stark differences between first division in Germany as opposed to second and third division in Germany. And we also look at the adaptation process over time, actually, as players get used to playing ghost games, actually, and then try to examine the impact channel. So this is, I think, what we see as our contribution to the debate that we currently have. So in a nutshell, the results are home advantage vanished in the Bundesliga, first division in Germany, and in the second and third division, we don't see anything really happening. We also, as I will show you later, find that the occupancy rate can better explain why the home advantage has disappeared than the total number of attendees to a game. This is something that I think Germany is in a sort of almost unique. Germany and the UK, I think, would be actually in a unique position because the Bundesliga and the Premier League in the UK have extremely high occupancy rates, while other leagues in Europe, the Italian or the Spanish leagues, have much lower occupancy rates, even in their respective first divisions. So this may also, I think, already give some hint why we may have different findings possibly across European leagues. And we find that there is some familiarization process over time, actually. So during the first games, the loss of home advantage was especially severe, and then apparently players got used to it to some degree over the course of the ghost games being played. And we also find, as shown later, that referee bias can add something to the explanation, but we don't think it can fully explain the entire vanishing of the home advantage. So what was the timeline? What did we observe? So this is basically on 6 to 9 March. We had the last proper football games in Germany. There was already one game before the ghost game before the shutdown. It was here 30 kilometers away from Düsseldorf. Derby between Mönchengladbach and Cologne. That was already the first ghost game ever. Then we had the entire shutdown of the Bundesliga, and on 16 May, Bundesliga and second Bundesliga restarted with ghost games without any audience. And 2 weeks later, the third division also started. And on 4th July was the end of the third division, when the season was over in all 3 divisions. So we basically look at these games here between May 16 and July 4th in the 3 divisions and compare them to as you will see, basically the 3 seasons, the 3 last seasons of these 3 divisions. So we have a total of 274 ghost games in our sample, 273 being in May, June, and July, and 1 being played in early March. So we could drop it out or leave it in. Yeah. And we have close to 3,000 games in total, the rest being no ghost games being played in the last 3 seasons. And we started with a very simple empirical strategy. Yes, we sort of had 2 measures of home advantage. What is first of all, what is the probability of a home win? What is the likelihood of a home win? Or what is the point difference between the home team and the away team? Yeah, and try to explain this through number of covariates and the corona dummy, basically. So all the huge advantages. This is clearly exogenous. Obviously, the corona shutdown and reopening to the ghost game. So I show you already the regression table, and they also explain sort of along all the variables that we use. So first, if we look at the corona dummy, this is simply 1 or 0, or we could also call it ghost game. Basically, that means is this a ghost game or not? And we see in this regression, so the measure of likelihood of a home win decreases quite significantly by 15 percentage points, controlling for all types of other variables in the first division, the Bundesliga, but we don't see anything happening in second and third division. And we also, if we sort of take instead not the probability of a home win, but the point difference, we see the same. On average, they lose almost, no, well, not quite a point at home during the ghost games in the first division, but not in the second and third division. Of course, we first did this very simple analysis, just looking at the sort of differences in probability. That said, of course, there may be all other factors, and maybe by chance that you just had the more difficult home games as ghost games and the easier games before. So we said, okay, we of course need to control for all sorts of other stuff that may have happened. In order to identify ability, we looked at the literature with which many of you are very familiar, I think. So what is the difference in player values? So the in million, actually million euro. 1 million euro difference in player value decreases the probability of a home win by 1.6%. So if the away team, let's say, increases in value, you are less likely to win, or the other way around. If your home team is more valuable, then it's so this is by and large what we would have expected. We also see sort of the position in the table. Yeah, we see if this is a negative sign, of course, because if you are first in the table, it's better than if you are 10th in the table. And we also see that this has some explanatory power in all 3 divisions. Or maybe interestingly enough, we see that the difference in value, in player value, seems to actually increase from first to second division. Our explanation is actually that a 1 million euro division has a much larger impact in the second division, given that the entire level of values, of player values, is much lower than in the first division, where 1 million difference is not, let's say, as much, relatively speaking, than in the second division. And we also find this with respect to points in the, so you see in the third division, it's even more important is when we look at points, actually, because the 1 million difference is much more in that sense in the third division than in the first division. We are trying to sort of check whether the number of days that you were allowed to rest between games has an impact. And we see that if we sort of lump all 3 leagues together, we find a weak support for that. But this all comes basically from the third division. where it seems to play some role, which I think makes a lot of sense with respect to sport theories. That probably the fitness levels are much higher in the first and second division than in the third division. We also introduced the measure of shape. Actually, shape meaning what was the performance of the last 3 games. And we can, I think, properly discuss whether 3 games are better than the performance of 4 games or 5 games. We don't have all the results. We actually did a check now after being asked by one referee in the meantime, why have you chosen 3 games and not 4 or 5? So we rerun all the stuff with 4 and 5 games, and it doesn't change really anything. And it shows shape has some limited explanatory power in the third division. Actually, we also looked at geographical factors because this is the sort of alternative explanation in the sense, yeah, does distance play a role? And we see, well, by and large, it doesn't play a role. Actually, and we used various measures of distance, but but it didn't really play a role. And we also looked, we didn't even think about altitude, and maybe Germany is not a good country to control for altitude. We only included this because we found it in the literature that somebody had included altitude, and I assume that in the Latin American games between Brazil and Bolivia it plays a huge role, but the difference may just not be large enough in Germany to play a role, actually, so we didn't find anything here. We also looked at other specific match-related effects. Yeah, has there been a new coach, for example? Didn't find anything significant. Is this a derby? A derby is always difficult to classify, of course, because it has a lot to do with feelings. And even teams that are close by may not have the same derby feeling, let's say, as teams that are further away, especially, let's say, in the Ruhr area. The distance from from Schalke to Dortmund is not so much different than from Schalke to Düsseldorf. Actually, still, Schalke to Dortmund is a much heavier rivalry than Schalke to Düsseldorf. And Düsseldorf to Leverkusen is not really rivalry, but we had to find something meaningful, not to classify them all ourselves. So we said, okay, if this is a radius of 50 kilometers, we consider that a derby, but in the end we didn't find any significant effects, and we didn't do that for night matches either, which are played on Friday and Monday, well, and one on Saturday night in the Bundesliga. There is a limited number of stadiums in Germany that still have a track. In the Bundesliga, it's only one, actually, in Berlin, the Olympic Stadium from Hertha BSC. So in all of the leagues, we have small numbers of stadiums with a track, actually. But over all 3 leagues, there are a few. And it seems that it's very much in line with previous literature, has a negative effect on the home advantage. And that probably explains why a lot of clubs have built proper football stadiums in the meantime without tracks, because it increases the home performance. And I would say this as well, weakly significant at all, and probably also due because there's a very limited number now of stadiums with a track. The share of standing places plays a role, not so surprisingly, especially in the second and third division, actually, and this probably has to do that they have higher shares. They tend to have higher shares of standing places because they have been, they are quite limited these days in the first division. So overall, we said, okay, this is sort of, we see an effect, actually. Yeah, the home advantage has vanished, but then we thought, okay, let's dive somehow deeper into it. Yeah, what has driven the decline of the home advantage in the first division? Why didn't we observe it in the second and third division? Can we have any meaningful sort of ideas or explanations for that? We said we already have some interesting findings at this point. Yeah, the travel distance doesn't seem to matter. So our very initial idea, yeah, disentangle the effects. We say it seems to be more the crowd than actually the travel distance, at least from this natural experience. Yeah, and so the next question that we ask is this sort of do get players used to it? Yeah, is it somehow developing over time? And for that purpose, yeah, we said, okay, let's now sort of interact the coronavirus with the match day. Yeah, and we see here, you also see the graph on the bottom. Yeah, in the, I think there was the third division, we had the highest number of ghost games, 9 ghost games altogether. In the Bundesliga, we had no, it was in the Bundesliga. We had 9, and in the third division we even had 12 ghost games, I think. And what we find here actually is that, as you see, yeah, in the Bundesliga, there was this negative ghost game effect. Yeah, the probability of a win declined, but you also see that with the number of match days, it actually increased again, or you'd say the loss of the ghost game disadvantage declined over time. So then if you calculated more or less at the end of the season, the players got fully used to it. And this is interesting in the sense that the home advantage reappeared, interestingly enough, even though there was no audience at this point. Yeah, so we said there seems to be other factors at work as well, yeah, that account for the home advantage. So I think it's still an unresolved puzzle in the same, while at the end of the ghost game season, let's say, the ghost game disadvantage has disappeared, apparently. So the home advantage returned, actually, as players apparently adapted to some degree to the ghost game situation. Then we ask ourselves the question: what is the best measure, basically, for if you think crowd plays a role, or at least in the beginning played a major role for the disappearance of the home advantage? What is the best measure to capture the crowd? And we discussed this among ourselves, and that. See, I'm an ardent supporter of and member of FC St. Pauli, and this has a stadium of only 29,000 people, but it's always sold out. Yeah, and in Berlin, the Olympic Stadium has 75,000 capacity of 75,000 by and large, but it's almost never sold out. Yeah, so our intuition was, well, if you play in front of 37,000, let's say, 50% filled Olympic Stadium in Berlin, that may actually not give you the same home advantage than playing in St. Pauli before a crowd of 29,000 that is sold out all the time. Yeah, and then coming to the ghost games, it may also be, if you are used to playing in, let's say, half full or half empty stadiums, it may not be so. It may not matter so much that the other half is also leaving, so to say, that because you may have been used to play in half-empty stadiums. And this is, so we say, okay, let's maybe compare what is a better explanation. Is it more the occupancy? Yeah, is it meaning the rate between some measure between 0 and 1? Yeah, 0 being nobody in the stadium, 1 being it's sold out. Yeah, or is it the total number of people coming to the games? And here we took the average attendance before the game, before the ghost game season started, basically, and said, okay, if you had an average attendance of, let's say, 35,000, yeah, then this was your attendance. And here we looked at the average occupancy. That is something, as I said, between 50%, 100%, and so on. And this may also, is our intuition, give some idea why it matters so much in the Bundesliga, or it's our intuition, because in the second and third division, clubs are much more used to play in front of half-empty stadiums, actually, as opposed to the Bundesliga, which has, as the Premier League in the UK, a very high number of sold-out games, actually. So the average occupancy is over 90%. Of the game. So the loss of occupancy is much more dramatic in the Bundesliga than it has been in the second and third division, because there are games played, especially in the third division, with occupancy rates of 10% or something. So we said, okay, we also find actually in our analysis that occupancy is a better explanation than the total number of attendance, and we think this. I'm not a psychologist, of course, but sort of from intuition, I sort of find it intuitive to some degree. Yeah, it's this may be different in different leagues. We have this paper by Bryson et al. And I think this is something that is interesting to explore more in the future, but it may have to do with sort of the lower level of occupancy rates that we see outside the UK and Germany, actually even in the first division. So what is the sort of, at this point we said, okay, the crowd drives the home advantage to some degree, but it falls with decreasing occupancy, and players also tend to get used to it. And at that point, we sort of finished the paper that you have seen, I think. And then we, of course, saw the other papers that have come forward in the meantime, said, okay, maybe let's augment the analysis a little bit and also look how, what is the channel really, how the occupancy rate or the audience effects match outcomes. And some of the papers, such as James and other ones, have sort of also found that the referee bias or the referee's behavior, let's say, plays a role. So we said, okay, let's account for that, how much this can explain for our data, especially, and also look at whether tactics, match play, playing style may have changed during the ghost game season as opposed to the no ghost game seasons. And well, there may be psychological factors which we have no very good idea yet how to control for them, given that we cannot measure hormone levels or something of the players during the games. So what we did next, let's say, okay, let's compare as you have done. How do in the German setting, only for the German game, have yellow cards? How have they changed? Yeah, and the interesting thing is we find something that is similar to. Fortunately enough, yeah, we find something that is relief to some degree. Yeah, we find something similar. The number of yellow cards has changed. Yeah, indeed, the home team in the first. We don't have the data, unfortunately, for the third division for these games. We only have it for the first and second division. So we looked at how has the yellow cards, and we see the yellow cards. The pattern is slightly different, but the numbers are fairly similar in the end. The home team gets more yellow cards in the Bundesliga and also in the second division. And in the second division, we cannot observe in the Bundesliga that the away teams gets fewer yellow cards. At least it's not statistically significant. It is statistically weakly significant in the second division. And if you add up, well, if you look at the difference between, let's say, 0.3 more for the home team and 2.7 or 0.27 less for the away team, we come to a number that is almost similar, let's say, the difference, yeah, in yellow cards between home and away team. So if it would take the difference between yellow cards for the home and away team, that is not too different actually between the first and second division. And we thought, okay, this is interesting because in the first and second division, actually the yellow card given behavior has changed. But we haven't seen the same effect on results, interestingly enough, in the first and second division. And we see a similar pattern with respect to fouls. Again, it's slightly different, but on average, there's one foul more awarded against the home team in the Bundesliga, and in the second division, for whatever reason, it's different. It's one foul awarded less for the away team, but the difference in fouls awarded is very similar, one. By and large, and we observe basically controlling for all the other variables that referee behavior has changed, but of course we don't know yet why it has changed. Yeah, it can of course be a bias, yeah, that they are affected by the crowd, but it can also be that they have changed the style of play. Yeah, maybe it was perfectly correct to award more yellow cards to the home team, and fewer yellow cards to the away team because the playing style may have changed. So we said, okay, we need to control for that as well, of course. Yeah, is there something? And this is, of course, playing style. I've seen fantastic papers now that I have become so interested in the sports economics literature, yeah, on the number of passes and what type of passes and the length of passes and also on. But we don't have this perfect data yet, so we have a rather crude measure, I must admit, of playing style, which is, oops, where is it? It's sort of the shots on goal for the home team and for the away team. And actually, we see that we can't really see anything. And we also have the corners. Yeah, it's probably not a tremendously good measure of playing style, but this is the data that we had available, let's say. And we see that, yes, the home team has, for whatever reason, fired fewer shots yeah, in both leagues, actually. But this probably, it's unclear whether that's, I would say, sort of can really explain why there are fewer yellow cards, or it doesn't seem that there are fewer more yellow cards awarded to the home team. Yeah, it doesn't, to me, it's not a very, maybe you have a better intuition why this could be the case, that if you fire fewer shots at home, get more yellow cards. Yeah, maybe because if you fire a yellow card, you cannot shoot anymore at the goal, because you have committed a foul. So there may be some relation, but it's not. So probably it's not a very good explanation for the playing style. So we are left with this finding at the moment that we find this weak evidence. Let's say this has changed. But what is interesting, I think, most interesting, is that again we have very similar findings across the two leagues. Yeah, so we think it cannot really sort of properly explain why the home advantage has disappeared in the first division and not disappeared in the second division, because at least the shots fired, and if we come back here, yeah, the yellow cards awarded, the fouls committed, yeah, have very similar patterns between first and second division. So we are left, I think, with the finding here that we say, well, yeah, there may be other reasons why the occupancy rates it may be due to psychological factors that are hard to measure, actually, that they affect the home advantage in the end. It doesn't seem to be all referee bias, because the referees seem to be similarly affected somehow, or maybe they are not at all affected, given that we also have the video assistant and so on. And the referee bias may not play such a huge role, possibly anymore, a bias in the sense of wrong decision, as they have possibly in the past. So we think the referee effects can at least not explain the returning home advantage. Yes, they may sort of add some explanation why it sort of disappeared, actually, but they cannot sort of shed any light really why it disappeared in the first division and not in the second division. So we are left with some open questions still and things. Maybe there are probably other drivers as well that drives the decline of the home division in the first division as captured by the occupancy rate. So this is our findings so far, let's say. To conclude, yeah, we have heterogeneous effects across leagues. The occupancy rates explain in the sense that captures, yeah, between club home advantage differences. The referee bias, we are not sure it's sort of the most important impact channel. We think there must be other channels at work as well, at least for Germany. Well, there's many open questions, and I'm already now looking forward to what happens over the new season across Europe, very different treatments in different leagues, artificial fan chant. In Germany, we have now an allowance that 20% is allowed to come back to the stadium, but it also varies across the regions, because in some regions, for example, in St. Pauli, my team, they only let in 10% due to special circumstances in Hamburg again. So there's still some variance even within the league, how much are allowed. We also have other factors that have happened simultaneously, that you are, for example, allowed to have 5 substitutes instead of 3. Before that, I'm not entirely sure whether that's true for all leagues in Europe, but that's true for the German leagues, at least. And I think there are many more interesting questions that I'm happy to follow. Hopefully the Fridays for football that we may observe here. So that's it, and I hope I haven't forgotten anything most important, but I'm very happy Kai is also here and can add it then.
Thank you, Justus. That was a really interesting talk. There's been some chat in the chat window, so just looking through. One question, a couple of questions of clarification on your player value data. Does it come from Transfermarkt? Is
Yes.
That where you got it from?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
then Georgius wanted to ask if that's the player value for the starting 11 or the entire squad.
It's I'm not entirely sure whether it's for the starting. I think it's for the starting quad, but I may be wrong. Maybe Kai can correct me if I'm wrong. Post it in the chat if we changed it to the entire, whether we have changed it to the starting quad or not in the end.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we use data for the whole squad.
For the whole squad, okay.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of an appropriate measure, especially when considering that we have, for example, the third league matches where they had to play 2 to 3 matches every week, and they rotated a lot in those in the squad or the players which really played. So it's kind of a cross-team measure and not just the starting 11.
Great, thanks.
We can maybe double check whether that would change anything.
Yeah, so I was trying to think about whether it would make a difference, what way the difference might be. But yeah.
Well, the signs showed into the correct direction. Yeah, so
yeah.
It's not that we said, okay, this is an utterly surprising finding. We need to check that. Yeah, but
I wondered whether, given you made a point about the effect being larger in the lower divisions when the actual values are smaller, that made me think, well, whether there might be a way of taking logs or something, or thinking about a percentage difference.
Yeah, that's actually just this morning, sort of when I was going through my talk again, I had the same idea that maybe we can look at something of percentage changes or something, some log. But this was too late to include it in the paper.
That's fair enough. Okay, Carl has asked you on when you looked at the familiarity of questions, did you check for familiarity by the referee? So how familiar the referee was with playing matches without fans?
How familiar the referee was with? No, we haven't done that. It's a good idea. So you think sort of if we could check how often the referee, how many ghost games they have been exposed to. Of course, in the first ghost game, nobody has been exposed to any ghost game. But this could, we haven't checked that actually.
Yeah, he mentions that we put in referee fixed effects. I don't know to what extent they were significant or had an effect, Carl. I can't remember the difference.
So sorry, are you asking me, James?
Sort of, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, well, when we looked across leagues, we didn't find any effects. We didn't find the familiarity effects, and we didn't find any suggestion that the referees became more familiar, or that the home or the away teams became more familiar.
Okay.
So yes, but that's pooling a lot of different divisions and pooling a lot of data. So it's very different, I suppose.
So you basically say they sort of invest into this work, but it's unlikely we find anything.
No, not necessarily. I mean, just Bundesliga. We just pooled a lot of countries and a lot of leagues together. We didn't split them out, and there's a lot of different things going on across those leagues.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the fundamental result about the yellow cards is really robust everywhere, and then understanding, what's going on elsewhere is a little bit harder.
Yeah, so we can check for that. See whether it makes any difference in our analysis.
Okay, and then Roman, I'm not sure of your point. If you want to either retype it or ask it. Roman? He says, because you may not be able to see this, just as he says, F is not only for Friday in football, but for Fortuna Düsseldorf either. I don't know if that's just a comment, Roman.
Well, it's probably one of our students. Huh? I can't see it, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, totally. Georges had to comment on the starting 11 versus squad, basically saying that your starting 11 would take into account injuries at the point of a match and the extent to which injuries mattered, I guess, in terms of outcomes if key players are missing. That's all we've got in terms of stuff in the chat window. So if folk want to raise their hands and make contributions, please do. Two at the same time. Stefan, and then we'll go to you, Carl. Stefan? Stefan having problems with his. Can't hear you, Stefan.
Sorry, I was having real trouble unmuting there. I'm sorry. I have no idea what that was, but sorry, apologies. It strikes me that one of the things about this is whether what we've seen in any of these cases is at all surprising. I mean, it did. One way to think about this is if this was kind of just regular factors, which are the sort of factors that are in your regression that account for this, then there would be no surprise about what happened. Whereas if it's something that no one had anticipated and no one could see, then this would be in some sense surprising. Well, we can measure surprise. Jan van Oors has done a lot of work on this, and I found in a lot of sort of looking at understanding results, surprise is a very strongly, has highly significant explanatory power. And the way you measure it is the difference between the expected outcome based on some model of past performance and the difference between the betting odds and the outcome. So it's easy to get, for example, the betting odds. So you could see whether the expected outcome was different from, where the outcome was different from the expected outcome, and then you could model. And then if something really different was happening, then the bookmakers wouldn't have anticipated, and you'd have genuine surprise there, and that would somehow confirm that something different was going on from the sorts of things.
James, you probably think I asked Stefan now to ask this question, right? because indeed we asked ourselves the same question, and then we wrote a second paper. Did the betting markets foresee these results? And I don't want to go into all the details, but the short answer is no. They didn't foresee it, so you could have made money actually, at least in the past, because they had consistently the wrong odds. To say we in our presentation conversation, we sort of already said maybe we can present this paper sometime in the future, but in that sense, at least for the bookmakers, it was surprising.
Right, but that also then suggests that, I mean, to the extent that referee bias, home crowd advantage and so forth, these are known factors which have been understood to be significant, then if it was a surprise, then it's not those factors, because if we knew it as econometricians, then the bookmakers knew it too, right?
Yeah, so the bookmakers must have, so it must be, there's something that they did that we haven't captured yet, possibly. Yeah, and with sort of we there's maybe sort of an imperfect capture, say the occupancy rate somehow, and the recovery rate maybe correlated with something that we cannot measure, of course. Yeah, but trying to think what exactly it is that we capture then, and maybe, of course, if it is something like the psychology of the players, that is so hard to measure somehow. Then it may be a correlate, yes, of the that you say, or maybe sort of they may sort of affect each other. Well, the occupancy rate may affect the psychology. There's maybe something that the bookmakers hadn't captured yet.
That may be right. I agree, but I think what you could also say, we know that there's this phenomenon of referee bias under social pressure. We've got all the papers on that, and this says it's not that. It can't be that, because if it was that, and we have all this research that shows that such a factor exists, then the bookmakers would have accounted for it. That's
a very good point. Yes.
Thanks, Stefan. Carl.
Yeah, so actually just relating to that discussion there, because in our paper we looked at the leagues where they allowed a few fans back as well, and we found much weaker effects when there was sort of even 100 fans in the stadium or a few hundred, which does suggest that there's some kind of cliff edge effect of having absolutely nobody in the stadium rather than just a few fans. And that's what we found even looking at the historical data as well. It's not regular attendance variation. It's something about a cliff edge effect of there just being absolutely nobody in the stadium. It seems to correlate well, let's say, with these changes in outcomes. And so yeah, my actual question was going to be more of an open question for everybody here. We're only looked at football so far. Who's collecting the data on other sports? Why would we expect this to be any sort of relate to Stefan's point? Why would we expect this to be any different to other sports? We've only collected football so far, right?
Well, in Germany, at least, handball has only. Well, that's all, in UK. There's virtually no handball, but it's sort of only started very recently. The German Bundesliga was way up before any other game has opened up again. But I totally agree. There's an opportunity now.
Carl, you observed the cricket here over the summer. Was there much of an effect in cricket? Guys from the US, was there much of an effect in US sports?
It would be hard to say for the cricket because the formats have changed, and the county championship, the stadiums are fairly empty anyway. There's only one man and his dog there anyway.
That's the effects that Justus found then.
Yeah, and it's quite a small sample, right? There hasn't been much cricket actually played. Very small sample of matches, even if you just focused on England.
Yeah, in Germany as well, the format, for example, of basketball has totally changed. because they don't have any proper home games anymore. Sort of, they have more like tournament style game in a third city.
Which is what I think they did for the NHL as well. I think hockey they played in two cities. I think, but I'm not at all an expert on that. So
I'm sure somebody must be doing baseball at the moment. You got to think.
And so a question that I've struggled with is, does it matter in the long run? I mean, for like sort of competitive balance in these leagues, I don't really have a clear answer on that in my own head. And does that matter for outcome uncertainty and demand?
Well,
I mean,
clear
fans
answer
on
to that is competitive balance doesn't matter. So
yeah.
Roman has asked about water polo. I don't know if anyone's an expert on water polo. Wasserball Bundesliga.
I have no clue.
Must be some data somewhere to collect. Roger's got his hand up as well.
I think it does matter in that as a spectator or a supporter, you will see fewer home victories and more home defeats. And I've looked at the long-term proportion in English League results, where it's declined from 56% home wins before World War I down to about 44% now. And within a few years, on linear extrapolation, home advantage in English professional football will disappear completely. So I'm buying 23 home game tickets a season, and my average of home wins per season will go from 14 to 12. So I will be a more disappointed customer of football as a consequence of the loss of home advantage.
Well,
So it matters then. Anyone want to object to that?
it matters for the popularity. Does it matter for the competitive balance?
So it was, the way I'd say this is that the long term, there are so many factors that determine what makes an attractive and interesting league, and it's Roger's quite right, obviously, to say that you can identify there are changes that have occurred which in the balance of games at home stadiums over time. But the other factor is that there's no systematic relationship between this and the overall attractiveness of the sport to fans. And in that sense in which competitive balance doesn't matter, because there are so many factors that determine interest in a league. It's just not capture it. It's just too crude a measure to capture any real variation.
An interesting observation is the casual observation. I don't know whether anybody has looked into it, but the ghost games have been much less popular on TV in Germany. Interestingly enough, yeah. So there seems to be a rather complementary relationship, well, it's partly paid by the public broadcasting fee indirectly because it's shown on public TV, but in theory, at least, if it is less popular on TV, they should pay less for the rights.
Well, this is something that I think is, people have mentioned certainly here in England, is that the ghost games they're not quite the same. Although some of the games in the Premier League last weekend were, so far this season have been lots of goals at least, even if the fans haven't been there. But yeah, the implication is that if we value the games less, then Sky Sports will pay less for them the next time they'll be negotiated, should the situation carry on.
No, well, that's an old one. That's not the one I meant. What is it? That was a light blue colour.
Sounds like Rob, but while we wait for that, Adam, you got your hand up.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you. Really interesting presentation. I just wanted to sort of chip in. It's probably already been mentioned really now about the balance, outcome uncertainty, and the demand at the stadium. Really, when I last looked at it, appeared different to the demand the TV audiences. And whilst stadium fans, obviously the majority are home fans, preferred either the sort of extremes, that the home team winning or the home team losing, which usually meant that there was a bigger team with superstars turning up, whereas the TV audience preferred the more balanced outcomes. And if outcome uncertainty is changing, it would be really interesting, I think, to get back into that research again to see what happened with the TV audiences.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And hopefully, I've actually studied your paper as well recently, because I've been looking at this, and I think the recent papers from James and others have probably covered, I think, probably all the academic interests. So I'm probably a bit late to the party by studying this, but I'll still carry on and hopefully then also start taking a look again at outcome uncertainty. But yeah, really interesting times.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Sarah has said that in rugby and cricket, they did change rules to help alleviate player fatigue as games were played over a shorter period. And there was obviously a similar decision with allowing 5 substitutions in football. And I wonder, actually, going back just as to the conversation about the squad value versus the 11, that suggests that squad value might be different when you can make 5 changes, because you can tap into more of that squad value in the ghost games than you could prior. Have they maintained the 5 substitutes in the Bundesliga this season?
Yes.
Okay, because they stopped that in England, so England is back to 3 substitutions.
Well, we only had 1 game a day. Second game day only starts today, but I'm pretty sure that last weekend there was still 5 substitutions possible. Adam's back. Yep.
Sorry to raise my hand again. I've not joined the team members, so I can't actually put into the chat myself. I think unless I'm mistaken, I think the team player value data in this paper is not time variant. I think it's static at the beginning of the season, so it's not going to change by game. But of course, when the 2 teams meet, it's the difference between those 2 teams that will change each match from memory.
Yeah, we can double check sort of and play around, let's say, and see whether something is changing actually. But this is good. Thanks for the hint.
The transfer market, their valuations change every 2 months or so, so you can actually update them.
Okay, any more points to make? Comments, questions? In which case, it remains to thank Justus and Kai for presenting a really interesting, thought-provoking paper on a very topical current issue, especially as the Ghost Games continue just this week. We've been told in England that the Ghost Games will continue for at least the next 6 months. So it's certainly a topical issue, and we certainly have the variation, more and more variation, more and more data with small numbers of fans and varying portions of the stadium in Germany. So it's certain to be a ongoing issue, and hopefully we can get a bit more clarity on the remaining issues that still appear to be outstanding, even after we have extra amounts of exogenous variation taken away. So thank you, Justus, thank you, Kai, and thank you everybody for the comments. Next week's talk, we're very pleased that Stefan Szymanski of the University of Michigan is going to present. So that's next week, October the 2nd. Stefan will present on the incidence of an ad valorem tax, the adoption of VAT in the UK, and cost pass-through by English football clubs. So do join us for that. And in the meantime, do have a fantastic weekend. Thank you very much for joining us. And until next time.
Thanks very much.